Slater Crusaders, America's the greatest country in the world. Welcome to our Make America Healthy Again special. MAGA, Make America Great Again, is more than an election that took place last November. MAGA is a movement, and MAGA has a lot of aspects to it. This American golden era that we're ushering in here, that Trump speaks of, it can't just be a single political victory. It's got to be more than November 5th. And it can't even be just a couple bills that might pass. MAGA has to be bigger than that. It has to be a major cultural shift in America. That's the true renaissance. That's the rebirth that we need in our country. It's a reconnection to what we've lost or what has been actively taken away from us. And one of those things that's been taken from us is our health. Make America Healthy Again. It's a movement that's growing. More people seeing what's going on. And I'm trying to figure out what my role is in this movement. I'm not a nutritionist, so I have no authority to give advice here, beyond just like basics. As much as I look like a stunning Adonis in every conceivable way I know, I'm not an exercise expert or whatever, right? I can tell you what I do. That's all I got, right? So I'm trying to figure out what my forte is in this world. And I think my strength in this realm, this Make America Healthy Again realm, is something like making sure we see health as a conservative value. Somehow over the last few decades, health became this weirdo California crunchy hippie thing, right? Like Californian liberals drink their green smoothies. And then the conservatives are like, therefore, we're the opposite, and we just eat like junk all the time. It's like, I wanted to recapture health as a conservative value. Health needs to be once again a conservative value. I don't think we need to spend time here talking about how unhealthy we are. I'm sure you've seen pictures of beaches in the 70s in America. To give you a couple numbers, 75% of Americans are overweight, 40% are obese, a third of kids are obese. In 2013, just a decade ago, no state had more than 35% of their population obese. Today, 23 states have more than 35% of their population obese. And I compare that, and you're like, well, okay, that's the way it is. Well, it's not the way it was. Check out this video of a high school, La Serra High School in California. This was their gym class. Just like now they're pretty intense in it's above average gym class. But look at these guys. These guys are super jacked. They're in high school. There's regular guys in gym class. All right, that's what we used to be, and we need to be again. So let's take a moment. Let's go back as far as we can here. Let's talk about health as an ancient value. First, the Hippocratic Oath, 4th century BC. The Hippocratic Oath said, among other things, with regard to healing the sick, I will devise and order for them the best diet. But the word diet in Greek meant more than just food. Diet back then was a lifestyle. It was fitness. It was health overall. Of course, nutrition as well, but it was health overall. The Greeks had a very holistic view of health. And it fit under the category of something that they took very proudly, arete, or arete, A-R-E-T-E, arete. It means excellence or virtue. And the Greeks would apply that to the mind and also the body and the soul. Arete, excellence in all things. The Greeks were also very focused on potential and making sure you and everyone can live to their full potential, and health is essential as that. And that, just an example of how dedicated they were to this, it was the Greeks, of course, who came up with the Olympics. Michel de Montaigne in the 1500s said, it is not a mind, it is not a body that we are training, it is a man. And he ought not to be divided into two parts. I just want to share that quote again, this continuation of an idea of a mind and the body and the man all being one, connected. Quick little trivia question. You know the shoe brand ASICS? A-S-I-C-S? That is an acronym for Animo Sano in Corpore Sano. It means a sound mind and a sound body. So that thinking is ancient, worked its way all the way to our founding fathers. Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter giving advice to his 15-year-old nephew. And the opening of the letter was about what books you need to read, nephew. And he listed all the books that he needs to read in the original Greek and Latin. Then he said, give about 2 hours every day to exercise, for health must not be sacrificed for learning. A strong body makes the mind strong. Again, this idea of mind and body together. It's an ancient value. It was a founding father's value, and it worked its way through early American history. Teddy Roosevelt being the epitome of this. Teddy Roosevelt was born a sick, frail child. He had asthma, which at the time could kill people. He was nearsighted, and his dad was very disappointed in his young son. And the story goes that he took a young Teddy aside, and he said, Theodore, you have the mind, but you do not have the body. And without the help of the body, the mind cannot go as far as it should. I'm giving you the tools, but it's up to you to make your body. And Teddy Roosevelt responded and resolved right there. He said to Dad, I will make my body. But again, this is Teddy Roosevelt's dad, ancient virtue, founding father's virtue, conservative value. Your mind and your body are connected to make the man. And Teddy Roosevelt went on to live what he called the strenuous life. And he quickly in his childhood took up boxing. When he was at Harvard, he was on the crew team, then went on to lead the Rough Riders. And then one of my favorite books is called River of Doubt, about him and his son exploring a previously unknown river in the Amazon. They all almost died a couple times. It's a ridiculous book. It's called River of Doubt. He, in his speech about living a vigorous life, he said, we are a vigorous, masterful people. And the man who is to do good work in our country must not only be a good man, but also emphatically a man. We must have manliness, courage, strength, resolution, joined to decency and morality, or we shall make but poor work of it. So it's the morality, the intellect, and the physical strength. I know you may seem like, hold on, Slater, we started talking about health and like diet, and now we're talking about masculinity. It seems like, no, they're the same thing. That's my point. Health is an ancient virtue. Health is a conservative value. It's a Christian value, and it's an American value. We were settled by healthy people, the Pilgrims. We were founded by healthy people. We expanded to take over this whole nation, the frontier, because of healthy people. We thrived and won world wars because of healthy people. And today, we are unhealthy like no human beings have ever been before. And I, as a conservative, would like to conserve, or better yet here, restore the health and vigor that we used to have as Americans. And I want to give one more final motivation, if I may. Just did a segment on the radio this morning, actually, about how in America, two of our greatest natural resources is our bravado and rebelliousness. We'll save that for another special. But similarly, a final motivation, if you need one, is to stick it to the man. That's another thing that we love to do in America. We love to stick it to the man. We had a guy call in on the radio show on Sirius XM Patriot. He said he was 400 pounds. And like a year ago, he cut out processed foods and some other things, and now he's down to 200. And we had a bunch of people call in with stories like that. And then we had a bunch of dads call in and say that their kids were out of control and they cut out food dye and their life has changed. And it was so inspiring to hear people take control of their lives and for men to protect their families from poison that was coming into their house. And someone called in and they were equally inspired and they said, Slater, it's so cool to hear people stick it to the man. And I thought it was so awesome. Stick it to the man. The man wants us fat and sick. Stick it to him. Quick aside, and maybe we can get to this to our guests. The cigarette companies at one point had so much cash that they bought the food companies. And I first heard that, I was like, I've never heard that in my life. It's true. Philip Morris acquired Kraft Foods in 1988 for $13 billion. It was the largest non-oil merger in the United States at the time. And then Philip Morris bought General Foods and Nabisco. R.J. Reynolds, the tobacco company, bought Del Monte and Hawaiian Punch. Hawaiian Punch at the time was a cocktail mixer. And they decided to market it to kids as a juice. And they were the first people to put it in a juice box in 1983. So it was the tobacco companies who bought these food companies and did two things. They started marketing it to kids and doing a better job marketing in general, and they used scientists to make them more addictive. They've since spun them off, but the damage was done. It was the tobacco companies that changed the game for the food system in our country. So we need to stick it to the man and stop feeding this stuff to our kids and stop eating it ourselves. Stop being addicted, because addiction to you equals money for them. Your addiction is their money. Food, pharma, tech, it's all about addiction. Things that hijack your brain and capture your kids. It's a spiritual crisis too. We're becoming slaves to a system, and we hand our kids over to it, who are going to be stuck in it for the rest of their lives as well. We need to stick it to the man. It's time to make America healthy again. Mike Slater, The First TV. Spread the word. Welcome back to our special Making America Healthy Again. I want to go right now to Vani Hari. She is the food babe and founder of the protein of choice of everyone here on the show, True Vani. New York Times bestselling author, a couple different books. Probably the most relevant to our conversation right now is Feeding You Lies: How to Unravel the Food Industry's Playbook and Reclaim Your Health. Ms. Hari, how are you today?
Good. I'm so glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
I'm really glad you're here. And thanks for all your many years of this fight. And finally, we're all catching up to you. Where did this come from? Why is this your passion at all?
Well, my parents came here to the United States as immigrants. And when my dad had an arranged marriage to my mom, he brought her over here on her honeymoon and said, if we're going to live in America, we're going to eat like Americans. And that is how I was raised, on an ultra processed diet that was full of foods that you would find at fast food. I mean, I was at McDonald's every single time there was a coloring sheet available to get a free meal, Father's Day, Mother's Day, Easter, whatever, growing up. And it was just part of my diet. And as a result, I was a very sick child. I was on several prescription drugs, had eczema, had asthma, had allergies. And in my early 20s, I hit rock bottom, where I landed in the hospital getting my appendix taken out. And it was that moment that I decided to take health seriously and look at what I was eating. And what I found was shocking. I couldn't believe all of the man-made chemicals I was eating on a day-to-day basis. That I was eating food that was not created by nature, that was created in a laboratory, additives that were being used to solely kind of create a delicious product, but not add anything to my health. And when I chose to remove processed food from my diet, everything changed. I lost weight, my depression went away, my anxiety went away. I basically became another person. I went off 9 prescription drugs. And my eczema, my asthma, my allergies all vanished as a result. And it was something that I just couldn't shut up about, frankly. And the people around me, my friends, my family, my coworkers, all wanted to know the secret to this new transformation that I was going through, because they saw the changes from a physical standpoint and they wanted a piece of what I was doing. And so they asked me to start a blog. And at first I wanted to call it eathealthyliveforever.com. And my husband, who's the tech geek in the family, said that was a terrible name. No one's going to remember that blog to go to. And he found Food Babe for $10 on auction. And we named the blog Food Babe. And for a year and a half, I actually never had my photo on the header of Food Babe. It was really about teaching other people to become a food babe. But I found myself hiding behind this persona because, again, I was still working in the corporate world, working for as a Big Six consultant for all these financial institutions, these giant banks. And so my job was very serious. And so I kind of hid this blog behind this name Food Babe while I was writing. But, eventually it came out that who I was and what I was doing. And it became so incredible when I started to realize the community was bigger than just my friends and my family. It was a group of people that not only care about their health, but they're willing to hold these companies accountable to make better changes. And it was when Chick-fil-A invited me to their headquarters, where I had to take off work to go consult with them instead, that I realized that I had an opportunity to really change the food industry. And at that point, I quit my consulting financial career and became a food activist for the first time. And, when I quit my job, I quit it cold turkey, wasn't making a dime doing what I was doing. And it was a very scary time, but what it allowed me to do is focus in on these issues that I had an insatiable curiosity about. And the first one was an issue that I'm still fighting today: how American companies are using ingredients they don't use in other countries in the same exact product that they use here in the United States. A more poisonous, more toxic version here in the United States when they're using safer, better for you ingredients in other countries. And this runs the gamut. I mean, back then I did an investigation and I saw that Quaker Oats, for example, oatmeal, strawberry oatmeal here in the United States was artificially dyed dried apple pieces with red 40 coloring to make a strawberry oatmeal, but in Europe, it was real strawberries. And seeing that side by side comparison is what fueled me to take action. And so I decided to take on one of the largest food corporations in the world, Kraft, on the fact that they were serving little children macaroni and cheese with artificial food dyes here in the United States, but not in other countries. And we took them on. We got over 386,000 petitions. I took those to Kraft headquarters, and they told me we have to agree to disagree. And eventually they had to change because we changed the market share. We informed so many people of the truth about their product that they lost customers. Customers went to their competitor, Annie's, who then General Mills ended up buying for $800 million. And then they had to change. It was just an incredible awareness event. And it was the start of this massive movement to create petitions, to hold companies accountable, and do what the government leaders have not been doing in Washington, which is telling these companies that it's not okay. It's not okay to serve a better, safer version of your product for other citizens. You should be selling the same safer version for all your customers when you find out that there's problematic ingredients in them.
Good for you. It's an amazing story. I heard from Casey Means, I never heard this before, that the tobacco companies for a while, like in the 80s, owned all the food companies. And the argument is they brought in their scientists and they brought in their marketing teams, and that was the beginning of the downfall. Do you believe that story? And I guess the bigger question is, how did we go in our great country from real food to fake food?
Yeah, I mean, that was the catalyst that, Philip Morris and RJR Reynolds came in and they bought Kraft Foods and they bought General Foods at the time. And they took the technology that they learned on how to hook people to cigarettes and use that same flavoring technology in food. And so it's largely that flavor component. When you see it on an ingredient label, it's called natural flavor. And it can mean 1,000 different chemicals behind that one label. And that's one of the biggest loopholes right now that exists at the FDA, is that food companies can put any kind of combination of chemical around that label. But what those chemicals do is they create the 1 millionth best part of the taste. It's what PepsiCo uses a robot that mimics human taste buds to test how addictive their products are so that we can't stop eating them. And this is what other companies are using this technology to allow the entire bliss point to happen in your brain so you can't stop eating a product. It's so that every time you go to that product, you remember the flavor, your mouth starts to water, you start to remember that taste. And it's the same thing that actually MSG does. And this is something that's in a Chick-fil-A chicken sandwich, for example. Like, the reason why my mouth waters when I say Chick-fil-A chicken sandwich is because of the MSG. I remember what it tastes like, even though I haven't had it in 15 years.
So that's under the category of natural flavors or artificial flavors on the labeling?
Both artificial flavors and natural flavors. Yeah.
Wow. Wow. What a trick. Because you see natural flavors and you're like, oh, that must be natural and good. But you're right. There's no telling what they're allowed to put behind that. Let me throw you something that people still tell me today. Oh, food babe, come on. I eat junk and I've eaten junk my whole life and I'm fine. Or my grandma ate nothing but junk and she's 95 and she's healthy as a horse. What's the big deal? You and blah, blah, blah. What do you say to that?
The junk has changed. When you look at products comparing like what certain products that we used to indulge in, like hamburgers and French fries and all of those things. Like, for example, McDonald's used to use beef tallow to fry their French fries. Now they're using genetically engineered seed oils that are planted to withstand heavy doses of the chemical Roundup linked to cancer. So we have an entire chemical dependent food system that's been created since the 1980s. And so this is something that is new. It's a massive experiment. We owe it to our children to tell them the truth about what's been done to the food system. This is something that I do with my kids. I have a actually, he just turned 4 last week, 4 and 8-year-old daughter. I have a 4-year-old son and an 8-year-old daughter. And it's something that I make sure that they know the truth about what's been done. When they go down the cereal aisle and they see all of the cartoon characters, they know that's poison. They know, and they point it out to me every single time. And every time my husband takes them to the grocery store, they're sending me pictures of them in the cereal aisle because they're pointing out the ingredients, and they're learning about what's happening in the food system. This is what every single parent should be doing right now. We should be holding these we should be holding these educational systems about what to eat and what not to eat, how to avoid these chemicals, these man-made additives that have created this mass experiment for our bodies. And now we are seeing what's happening as a result. 38% of preteens, 12 to 18 years old, are pre-diabetic. It used to be 0. That is unacceptable. There is something we have to do. We have to change this next generation. It starts with education. It starts with telling them the truth, and telling them the truth in a way that makes them understand that something man-made in a laboratory is not good for their body.
I've always said, at first it was about technology, but I've always said that real life is better than fake life. And it's the same thing, real food's better than fake food. Last question for you, Vani, I'll let you get on. Are you worried? I'm sure you're excited about RFK Jr. and just the whole MAHA movement moving forward here in the government, et cetera. But are you worried about the power of the lobbyists and how they're going to come in and they're going to crush you and crush everything and continue on behind the scenes with all their stuff because they got the big money and they'll be able to fund what they need to do to get away with it more? Are you worried about the lobbyists?
I'm not too worried about the lobbyists because I've been up against them before when it came to the GMO labeling fight in the past, where we worked to get genetically engineered ingredients on labels. They were really nasty. And when the chemical corporations got involved, I mean, I had my Wikipedia page taken over. I had people, threatening me at my talks at different universities. I had to have security. There were situations where there were quote unquote independent experts that were unleashed in the media to take me on every single time I would have a positive change in the food industry, to tell people that I'm a fear monger, that I'm a chemical phobe, that I, all of these different names that they would use to destroy my character. And I've been through this before, so I'm ready for it. And now is our time. We've got someone that is set to be the Secretary of Health and Human Services that has also been through this gamut and has been through this fight and has had everything thrown at him. And so that is one of the reasons why I think he's one of the people that are the most qualified to take on this role, to dismantle the corruption in Washington and undo the conflicts of interest that we've seen from year after year that have prevented real action from changing. I'll just give you an example. Red number 3 is banned in cosmetics. You can't use it in lipstick, but it's still allowed in food that we serve to children, and it causes cancer. They banned it 35 years ago. But you know what happened? The maraschino cherry industry, who supplies all the alcoholic drinks, who works with the alcohol industry, had such a strong lobby that they allowed it still in food because of that. And to this day, government leaders in Washington, someone is blocking this. Even though there's been a petition to the FDA, they've admitted that there's this problem in a hearing that they just did with Bernie Sanders on December 5th, 2024. And this is something that, again, is something that has to be dismantled. There is some conflict of interest that are preventing, no-brainer, low-hanging fruit changes that would impact our health from happening.
Ms. Hari, wonderful to talk to you. Keep up the wonderful work.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. Mike Slater on The First TV. Make America healthy again. Spread the word. Welcome back to our special here on The First TV about Make America Healthy Again. I want to go to Dr. Kheriaty, author of The New Abnormal, The Rise of the Biomedical Security State. He's also a scholar at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Dr. Kheriaty, thanks for being here, sir. I want to talk to you because we talked about diet and food earlier, but there's a lot of aspects of health. We spent the first monologue of the show talking about the ancient idea of health, going back to the ancient Greece about mind, body, soul, sound mind, sound body, and how we've sort of lost that recently. So I just want to ask you about our state, our mental health state in America, and also our soul health in America. How would you assess those two things?
So unfortunately, we're not doing very well in that regard. And one marker of this is the rise over the last 25 years, since 1999, of what scholars call deaths of despair. That's deaths by suicide, alcohol-related illnesses, and drug overdoses. Those have been on the rise for 25 years. That was grossly exacerbated and exaggerated by the lockdowns and the school closures and the other misguided policies during COVID, which made that crisis much, much worse. And we were very, very focused on one virus, one illness at that time, forgetting the downstream negative mental health effects of many of these policies like prolonged school closures and lockdowns. And as a consequence of that, we have suicide rates that are higher than they've ever been before, including among young people, among both men and women. And we have an epidemic of drug overdose. Another thing that is contributing to this, which again was exacerbated during COVID, is the epidemic of loneliness. And loneliness may not sound like a medical issue or even necessarily like a mental health issue. Maybe it's sort of like a problem of everyday living. But it turns out that loneliness worsens health outcomes, not just mental health outcomes like depression or anxiety, but it worsens general health outcomes like heart attacks, and strokes, and cancer in the same way that smoking 2 packs of cigarettes per day does. So as human beings, we're built to be in connection and in relationship with other people. And again, over the last couple of decades, and there's been many in my field and many social scientists that have written about this. If you ask people back in the 1980s, for example, do you have someone important in your life with whom, someone close to you with whom you can discuss important matters, which is a pretty good proxy for loneliness? Only 20% of people said, no, I don't have anyone, a family member, a friend, a colleague at work with whom I can discuss important personal matters. And, 1 in 5 people not having that is a bad thing. Well, that number is now doubled. It's now 40% and rising. So 4 in 10 Americans have no one in their life with whom they can connect and discuss important matters. That has very profound effects on our health. So, in addition to all that, there are also political implications for this crisis of loneliness. Hannah Arendt, who studied the 20th century totalitarian systems, noticed that totalitarian leaders are able to control a population when that population is lonely and isolated. She described what she called organized loneliness, which was a deliberate political program of separating people, of dividing families, of isolating individuals. And it's been long known that in order to control a population, you have to basically get people to feel like they're not connected with others in society. And then it's easier to manipulate them, which again, I think we've seen signs over the last several years that a kind of organized loneliness exacerbated by the pandemic put people in a state in which they could be more easily manipulated politically. I think we're starting to see some pushback on that. We're starting to see a societal reaction against that with the Make America Healthy Again movement, with the recent election. So I'm hoping that we can finally start addressing this crisis of deaths of despair, crisis of loneliness, because it's a very serious problem, at the psychological level, at the general physical health level, but also it's a problem at the social and even at the political level.
Yes. Trying to think of the root. As you're chatting, I'm thinking of what led us to this loneliness epidemic point. So I think some of the easy ones that just pop into my head is probably decrease of church attendance, right? That was
Yes.
kind of a built-in community you had. More
That's right.
transient, a lot of moving, right? Like my parents grew up in the same block and lived there forever, but now we
Yep.
move all the time, so it's hard to make community there. Maybe just the way we design our cities and towns at all, like suburbia, like bigger backyards, no front yards, things like that. Social media, we were promised more connection. Of course, that was a lie. We got less.
Right. Right.
What else? Anything else I'm missing? And I ask these because hopefully we can turn the clock back, or what can we do to maybe fix some of the big ones?
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with all of those. In fact, there's robust research literature to support all of those. My colleague Claire Morell at the Ethics and Public Policy Center has done a lot of work. Jonathan Haidt and others have done a lot of work on the effects of technology and social media, which again, as you mentioned, was supposed to connect us, but ends up leaving us more lonely and isolated in many cases. I think especially for adolescents who don't necessarily know how to navigate that world very well, but also for adults who get sucked into misusing technology. I mean, technology is a great thing, but it's a two-edged sword. You mentioned church attendance. That's another really important one. So the decline of religious participation is another thing that actually has been very well studied, even in my secular field of psychiatry. I have a colleague at the School of Public Health at Harvard, Tyler Vanderweel. His Human Flourishing program has done a lot of work on this. He published something in the Journal of the American Medical Association a few years ago showing that church attendance reduces suicide risk. This was a massive population-based study of nurses in the United States. And and that replicated findings that we've seen really for the last 100 years on suicide. We know that religious participation reduces the risk of suicide, which is obviously the worst mental health outcome, the most tragic mental health outcome, a downstream consequence of addictions and depression and bipolar disorder, other serious mental illnesses. And it's not to say that religious participation or religious faith automatically inoculates you against suicide, right? There's many other factors that can contribute to someone ending their own life tragically, but religion and religious participation has been shown to be one of the most protective factors. Part of that is probably the moral teachings against suicide among all of the major world religions, particularly Christianity. Another aspect of that is the hope or the meaning or the purpose that people can find in religion, which gives them something to stand on, gives them strength when they're going through difficulties. But a third factor is simply being with other people, right? Which you can find in places other than churches, but for many, many people, Sunday participation in a worship service or a weekly Bible study or a small group that they participate in, that's a source of very profound support. And when you share something as deep and important as religious faith with a group of other people, that can profoundly reduce the possibility that someone feels lonely and isolated and feels like they have nowhere to turn if they are in crisis. So the secularization that we're seeing in Western societies, I think, is another major component. You mentioned the design of cities. You mentioned, the way, I could add to that, the way in which our professional life is very often organized. That's, a few generations ago, a kind of rootedness and loyalty to a particular company that I might work at for my entire career gave people a sense of stability and purpose and a professional identity that today is very unstable in an economy in which people are routinely changing jobs. And, there's pros and cons to both models, obviously. But I think we've, as a society, moved so far in the direction of rootlessness and instability in those traditional places where people found a sense of purpose and meaning and identity are, were solid 50 years ago and are much more liquid, much more fluid today. And I think all of those factors are a part of what we're seeing here at work.
Very well said. We've got about 2 minutes. I don't know if we have enough time to talk about the effects that Obamacare created on where we are right now, but, and this, my instinct is not to look for political solutions to these things, but that's kind of like the nature of this show and this network. So we're excited about RFK Jr., et cetera, and the personnel that are now in DC, and we can maybe get rid of some of the bad things that we've done at least. What's a political answer that you think would be wise moving forward?
Yeah, so Obamacare, we could spend hours talking about it, but just in a nutshell, in 30 seconds, it created a kind of centralization and moved us further in the direction that we were already going of increased centralized top-down managerial control of medicine. And I think medicine needs to move in the opposite direction toward decentralized, sort of grassroots, sort of, homeschooling movement for medicine models of providing care to patients. People do not like our current medical system. They do not like the way that the state in which they find themselves when they go to the clinic or they go to the hospital, and the physician is staring at a computer screen rather than talking face to face with them and examining them. And so we've moved so far in the direction of top-down bureaucratic centralized control in medicine, Obamacare being one piece of moving us in that direction. And I think we need medical freedom. We need decentralized control. We need to allow models of direct primary care and other things, cooperative models for health insurance that are growing up on the grassroots. We need to let those models flourish and see which ones of those models are economically feasible and deliver good care for a good cost. And so I'm hoping the new administration will kind of cut down on the centralized bureaucratic control that we see in our public health agencies and allow many different medical models to flourish so that doctors and patients can find ways of providing good care at an affordable cost in a way that people don't hate, right? that they're not so disinclined to want to go see their doctor and being put through this bureaucratic machinery that feels totally depersonalized and not really attentive to their needs.
Yes, we'll let DC do that, get out of the way, and we can take care of the rest of these things in our culture at large. Dr. Aaron Kheriaty, go buy the book, The New Abnormal, Rise of the Biomedical Security State, and grateful for all your work at the Ethics and Public Policy Center. Dr. Kheriaty, good to talk to you, sir. Thank you.
Likewise. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks for your wisdom. Dr. Scott Atlas, coming up next, he'll tell us what's different about the previous Trump administration when it comes to health and this new batch of personnel. Dr. Scott Atlas next. Spread the word.
The lockdown is really against all evidence and, frankly, common sense. The policy itself is killing people. The policy of lockdown and total isolation has impaired and stopped most medical care. We are creating a massive catastrophe in healthcare and killing people by this very policy. But society must function. The cure here is worse than the original disease at this point.
Took a lot of courage back at the time to say that out loud. Dr. Scott Atlas was one of the men who did it. He's the author of the book, A Plague Upon Our House, My Fight at the Trump White House to Stop COVID from Destroying America. He's former White House Coronavirus Task Force advisor. Dr. Atlas, thank you for being here, sir. When you look back
Happy to be here.
on that time, what was there ever a moment when it was really hard for you to speak out? Was there ever a hesitation you had, or a moment when you really needed to muster your courage?
Well, there was never a hesitation. I mean, first of all, the President of the United States calls up asking for help. People are dying, and he's being fed wrong information by people who didn't know really the data or were incompetent. I mean, there's no hesitation. The reality is that it's my country, and I did everything I could to stop people from dying. It's sort of a no-brainer. The only problem was that, there was a lot of misinformation, and I hate to use that word, but there's a lot of really scandalously bad lies, false information, and incompetence, which made it even more urgent. It didn't make it that you could walk away.
Let's do the government science complex. Have they learned lessons from the mistakes of COVID, or do you think no?
Well, I think that there's not an effort there's an effort to avoid admitting error, and there's an effort to continue either lying about the people that were right, like myself, or simply hoping to, quote, turn the page. And this is a real problem, because we can't have a society that just says, oh, okay, we're on to the next thing. First of all, millions of people were killed and harmed severely by the policy itself. It's the biggest fiasco in public health history. Secondly, we can't heal and move forward as a society without the clear, understanding of the public of what was true and what was not true. And the first step to restore the trust that has been squandered by the public health agencies, by the university scientists, by the so-called expert class, that trust is gone and we need to restore it. And the first step in restoring it is for them to admit their error, just like it is in your personal life. That's the first step to restoring trust. So that stuff has not occurred. And this is, one of the concerns I have about the administration. One of my concerns is that there's a temptation to just turn the page and move forward because people are tired of the COVID discussion. And there are other things to talk about, but I think that we cannot let that happen. We need to first and foremost see these official statements of the errors that were made, the official so-called truths about what happened, because the data is the data. The lockdowns, the school closures, the pseudoscience stuff about masks, this stuff needs to be stated as clearly that was all wrong, and we knew it before we can move on to the next problems.
So policy is personnel, they say. What do you see are the differences between the group of people that Trump had around him?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you very well. You're going to have to speak louder.
Yeah, that's okay. Let me speak a little louder. What are the differences between the people that Trump surrounded himself with in 2020 versus the new group, health-related, that Trump has around him in this next administration?
Well, I think the first statement is there are two excellent appointments by President Trump in the health area. Jay Bhattacharya, nominee for head of NIH, and Marty Makary, nominee for head of FDA. These are two excellent appointments. And I say excellent because these people have knowledge, they have integrity, and they have critical thinking skills, and I know them both personally. So that's a big step up. But the second part is we'll see. We have to see what happens. We can't just say, oh, the election, the side you wanted to win won, therefore everything is fine. No, I mean, we need accountability, not just for the people that were the political opponents. We need accountability for the people on all sides. Everyone is working for the American people, not themselves. And I think, of course, it remains to be seen. I mean, I agree. I'll say, the Make America Healthy Again, whatever you want to call it. Yes, I agree that we need to make sure safety is a top concern. We need to be anti-corruption, particularly with pharma, but with other sources. It's a great focus to say obesity is the biggest public health problem. There's no question about that. It's been ignored. But I have concerns, and partly, of course, it's unfair. Nothing has been done yet. They haven't even started. But we need to make sure we're not suddenly using the power of government for regulations and taxes on things like junk foods or sugary drinks, because this is just a replication of this elitist overreach on government. That's not the role of government. We need more information, but it's not we don't want to replicate this sort of leftist, elitist overreach that they know best and they're going to start regulating our behavior. No, we're a free country. We need to make sure that there's a priority on the real issues here. I mean, frankly, food coloring is not in my top 100 issues, but a lot of other things are. And then lastly, pharma has a lot of problems, and we know that. But to just hopefully we will not have this blunt war on pharma at the expense of all the positives that come out of America's pharmaceutical industry. For instance, the biggest advance aside from clean water in our health is drugs, okay, antibiotics and other drugs. That is the main reason why Americans have the best outcomes from cancer and, frankly, all serious diseases in the world because of this access and innovative sector of pharma. So we need to not block the innovation, but still repair all of the corruption and all of the hidden data and all the problems with pharma. Of course, those are clear problems. So I'm looking for, with some optimism, some great changes, particularly by the people that I know there. And, we'll see. We need accountability. I mean, I want to see, for instance, I'll give you an example, to stop the corruption. I want to hear, and I have not heard yet, a pledge of, say, 5 years ban post-government service on taking a board or a job with the sector that you regulated. I mean, that's a clear conflict of interest that needs to be stopped. We need a ban on post-government service, at least for a certain number of years, to be on boards. We need term limits in the agency positions. I've not heard that yet. We can't have people like the Faucis of the world or the Deborah Birxes of the world that have 30 plus years working in agencies because they're unelected and they have their fiefdoms of power and they outlast administrations. And I think the elected people are the people that answer to the public. So we need to have these kinds of things, and I have not seen that yet.
I look forward to all these conversations. Dr. Scott Atlas, the book is A Plague Upon Our House, My Fight at the Trump White House to Stop COVID from Destroying America. Dr. Atlas, good to talk to you, sir. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks for having me.
It's going to be a very interesting time here on the, there's going to be, I don't call it a riff. There's going to be an interesting debate, conversation in the Make America Healthy Again movement about, and the conservative movement about like poison in our food, like the food babe was talking about in the first segment. The libertarian instinct is no, feds, don't ban stuff like that. And then my instinct right now is maybe we shouldn't let companies poison people. I mean, that's like a sensible law that leads to human flourishing. I look forward to these conversations, this debate moving forward, but let's all agree now that health should be a conservative value once again. Mike Slater, First TV, spread the word.